Welcome to the Saving Stormwater podcast. I have a great guest for us today, but before we get started, this podcast is made possible by complianceGO. complianceGO is a fully customizable stormwater inspection software designed to help your team avoid stormwater fines. From recording inspections on your phone or tablet to mapping out your project, complianceGO is equipped to help stormwater managers in every sector. Their software gives you the most features for your dollar, regardless of if you are in construction, industrial, municipal, or long-term stormwater work. Check them out at the link in the podcast description to get started with your first project free for life. All right, today I am pleased to be joined by author, advisor, and environmental consultant Joyce Kristiansson. How you doing, Joyce?
Hi, Preston. Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here. It's all good.
Well, I'm glad to have you. Before the podcast, we got to talk a little bit about who you are and what you do, but our listeners haven't had that pleasure. So tell us a little bit about your job history and a little bit about your environmental work.
Sure. So I've been an environmental professional for more than 35 years now. I've just always been a lover of the outdoors and nature, and I got a science degree in the 80s and then just went to work in contracting and consulting. I have a master's in environmental management and situated now in Houston, serving a lot of our energy clients here. So it's been quite a ride.
I'm sure it has. So the thing that kind of brought you to my attention was actually your book. You talk a lot about, well, I guess I should let you talk about that. Tell us a little bit about the book that you've written.
Yeah, so like I said, I've been working for clients for a long time, 35 years or more, and it was just kind of a time in my life when I just could see the need not just for corporate kind of responsibility, as important as that is, but maybe some personal sustainability. It's kind of like, like when I wrote the book, I think of it as a sustainability self-help book. And really, until you can take care of yourself, you can't really take care of the environment, right? Because, a lot of us care and care deeply, and we just feel like it's overwhelming, that maybe we can't see that we would have an impact, or we just feel like we don't have time, or it's too confusing. We get a lot of competing information. So when I put the book together, I had been through a bout with breast cancer that I told you about in 2017, and I was just recovering from that, and it was a journey, but it culminated in the book.
That's wonderful. Was your experience through breast cancer, I guess, helped at all through finding connection to nature and to the environment?
Oh, yes, definitely. I can still remember, and I write about this in the book, that I had just gone through my first round of chemo, and I was, well, they had given me some medicine that was supposed to help, but I think maybe I had a reaction to it. I'm not sure. But the day after, I was out with a friend in the woods with some ornithologists, and we were bird watching, and it just that bit of normalcy really helped sustain me.
Right. And unfortunately, if we don't make some changes, we might see some of that disappear.
Yeah, I think it plagues all of us. It worries all of us. What we see the litter along the road. You'll see the plastic bag stuck in the fence line, or traveling down a creek, and it just feels a little bit like, well, what can I do? What can I do about that? I try so hard. We all try so hard to do what we can do, but it's hard to kind of get outside like our own little bubble, I guess, if you will. And a big part of that is because it's like, first we have to take care of ourselves, right? So that's part of what the book was about. Is like, you know what? I'm not going to, you can't shame somebody into doing the right thing, right? They might do it because, they feel like they need to, but it won't last. It's not a sustainable habit. We just kind of need to give ourselves a break. We kind of have to get balance back into our life first. And that's really what the book starts out with, is kind of two of the essential foundations for really everything else. And, that is just sleep, number one. And I learned that the hard way with my breast cancer journey. I had been an excellent sleeper all my life, but this chemo just knocked me out. And seemed like it took a really long time to recover. And when you can't sleep, it's kind of like, nothing else in the day really matters. You're grumpy, you don't have the energy, you're just not going to add new things, to the mix. So once I saw, doctor, got a sleep study, got all of that straightened out, it just kind of changed everything. And
Mm-hmm.
I think we've got a real sleep shortage, for most people. I don't think that we get how important it is, and that we kind of have to build that foundation, as mundane as it sounds, but it's kind of like building a house. You have to start with a solid foundation. And that's something I talk about in the book. If you can start getting your life in order, then you'll have the energy to think about some of these other things. That's kind of where it starts.
Yeah, that's a good point. I heard a podcast a little bit ago where somebody who was a sleep doctor mentioned the amount of people in the world that can actually get by with between 6 to 6.5 hours of sleep, which is the national average, is represented as like 0.001% of the population.
Wow.
Right? But most people feel like they can run their best at 6 or 6.5 hours of sleep. And I think that's a good representation of, I've heard a few people mention that there's an American way of looking at things. And I think that's a good representation of, some people have problems, but I'm doing just fine.
Yeah, I've heard people say things like, "Oh, I'll sleep when I die," right? There'll be time for that, at the end of my life. And it's like, the science tells you, and this is, I have a science training. You probably have some science training. We know the science says that if you're not getting enough sleep, we find out every day new things that are going on while we're sleeping that replenish our body, help us rejuvenate, process the memories from the day. So if you're not getting that sleep, then you're being impacted. You just might have seen it. You're not performing at your full abilities unless you're getting enough sleep. So it's just super important, and that's where we start, because if you can get sleep in, and then you can, the next chapter next week, this book is broken into like 10 weeks, is on play. And it's like, play what? We're adults, who has time to play? But
Mm-hmm.
when you talk about play as something that's like, well, yeah, I get out, I exercise, I take walks, I do this, do that, but play is supposed to be purposeless. It's not supposed to have a goal. You're just supposed to be. And when you can incorporate that little bit of play into your life, it also opens up possibilities. And so these are just two of the foundational things: the sleep and the play. Go play with your kids, go play with your dog. Don't have a purpose. Just get out there and do it. So
Mm-hmm.
do you find like, do you get to play, as an adult? What's that look like, you think?
Well, to be honest, this podcast is kind of a play for me, as I get to talk with interesting people about interesting topics about something I'm passionate about, which is stormwater.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So it's restorative for you.
Mm-hmm.
And play for me is going out in the woods like I did with my friend, during my chemo. and just there was no purpose, there was no goal. It was just being in nature, listening to the birds, learning more about the different kinds of birds, enjoying the company that I was with. And I think sometimes as adults we let go of that and we don't understand the importance of it.
Sure. Um, so I'm seeing a lot of tie-ins. We talked a little bit beforehand about how being connected to the environment can really kind of be a motivator and can help you move forward in life. And I think I'm starting to see some of those parallels to, the importance of stormwater management and make sure that we all understand our place in water quality.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. Because
Um,
if you don't have the energy or the space, you feel like you're just going, pell mell, all through the day until you drop into bed and then get up and do it all over again. You're not going to have room for anything else.
mhm. Yeah,
And
that's a
but
great point.
yeah, but then when, for those of us that, if you're in this field, whether it's stormwater or air, water, waste, then you you care about the natural environment, right? And so my premise is that if you really love nature, if you first of all, if you can see it, right? If you really see it, you get out, enjoy it, experience it, the birds singing, whatever, then you're going to want to protect it, right? And if you want to protect it, then you're going to start being willing to make some small changes in your life to do that. And small changes matter, right? There's a lot of science behind that as well, that it's the little things we do, and the more that we can start doing those things and feeling some success, we can suddenly, it's not so hard. We can incorporate even more until these things become habits.
I love that. So one thing I run into pretty frequently is that because most people don't see the negative impacts of stormwater pollution, or because people don't necessarily connect themselves to, the water cycle, that it's hard to get people to feel like they need to do anything about it, or, that they need to care about it. Um, what what are your thoughts? Do you have some ways that you think we might be able to help people make a connection to, to water quality and to the planet and to their personal lives?
I do. I do. I mean, one of the most basic things we can do is get our kids out in nature, right? Get our kids to see the nature, fall in love with the nature, and then they're going to grow up doing things. But in the meantime, for us adults, it's kind of like, it's for stormwater, we have a series of permits, right? We have the municipal permits for the cities to control stormwater. We have the industrial permits for the industrial plants and the commercial facilities. We have construction permits for the developers and other earth moving activities. And so, what if we could think of like a permit for an individual, right? Kind of like a stormwater code of honor, right? So this would fall under the concept of just doing what you can do, within your personal sphere of influence. And so what that might look like is go, okay, if not me, then who? I'm going to take responsibility here, right? I love the Ralph Waldo Emerson quote. I cannot hear what you're saying because your actions speak so loud. So it's one thing for us to say it, another to do it. So maybe now when we're out taking a walk and we see that plastic bag blowing in the wind, we go, you know what? I'm going to be the one. I'm going to pick it up because that's kind of my stormwater code of honor.
Mm, okay. Uh, yeah, that's a good point. So I'm kind of thinking out loud here. In construction, traditionally there's a little bit of friction and headbutting that regulators and general contractors have between each other about, I, GCs just kind of want the job to get done and get done efficiently and effectively and correctly. And regulators come from this kind of perspective where they just need to make sure that the water stays clean. And I don't think either one of them are really out to pollute stormwater, but I think both of them can fall victim to this mentality where they don't necessarily keep the end goal in sight. It becomes less about maintaining water quality and more about following regulations,
I think that's a really good point. It's like, and I think you're absolutely right. Motivations are good, but they have a job to do. And what's the law say? Okay, I'm going to comply with exactly that and no more. And it's probably because they don't really exactly see the linkage between their actions and the effect on stormwater. It's not always just super obvious, right?
Right.
Especially here in where I'm at in Texas, the water there's a lot of sediment in the water bed, whether it's a river or a creek or even along the ocean, and so the water always looks kind of stirred up and like the muddy Mississippi, if you will. So it's kind of hard to see. Well, yeah, I'm doing this development. I put up my silt fences, but there's still soil. There's still suspended particulate ending up in the water in the ditches. It's like, well, who's to say exactly where that's from, right? But if we can get to the point where it's not about following the regulations, but more about personal responsibility, then we'll probably do a better job.
Hmm. And my next thought is kind of, it's hard to, I think kind of that American perspective is to look at others and go, man, they really need to adjust some things about what they're doing so that they can fix stormwater. But there's always a little bit more that you can do to reflect inwards.
Definitely. And it's not to say that the big corporations don't have any responsibilities. They absolutely
Sure.
do. It's a huge, huge, huge part of the solution, if you will. But that doesn't keep us saying, well, they're doing a lot of the pollution. Doesn't keep us from doing what we can do. Because if we all, I mean, there are how many billion people in this planet? 7 billion or something, 7 million in this country. Imagine if we all were aligned and we all cared enough, to
Hmm.
pick up the plastic bag, pick up the gum wrapper, not throw out the cigarette butt, not throw out the aluminum can, out the window, not throw the dirty diaper in a bag out the window of the car. You know, Imagine what it could look like, right?
Hmm.
It'd be amazing.
Yeah, that's a great point. I love that you bring up the cigarette example because that's something that I think about all the time. It's like I think that's an easy way to kind of show somebody how immediate they can impact the environment with such an easy discardable action. Um, I smoked myself for a little while, and there was a period of time where somebody pointed out to me, they're like, "Hey man, what happens when you throw a cigarette on the ground?" And I was like, "I don't know, it probably just stays there for a little while." And as I ended up in stormwater and ended up in kind of the environmental compliance aspects of this industry, I really started to think of like, holy cow, that most cigarettes probably ended up down a storm drain. And stormwater is untreated, so that means that probably ended up in the ocean. And how long does it take for that to break down? What do those chemicals end up doing to the environment? Like, what does my environmental footprint look like? And it was a really emotional experience for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that's exactly, what happens is like we're not we're not bad people. We're just not thinking about it. It's kind of like love the smoker, but fix the behavior. I was so I don't know, happy one day to see this lady. She threw her cigarette butt down on the ground. She ground it out, and then she picked it up. Wow, that was the first time I'd ever seen that. I was like, okay, that's really, a very self-aware person. And you're right. We know cigarettes have carcinogens in them, so nicotine and other chemicals as well. So those are absolutely going into the environment. I mean, they're going to the food chain potentially as birds and other things maybe try to eat them, and then they're eaten. So there is, one thing I do when I'm out and about on my walks, I do pick up cigarette butts. I will use a leaf or something to gather them. I know that probably looks pretty strange to people, but I just feel like, I don't even want my kids are grown, but I don't even want to see the kids in the neighborhood to see cigarette butts or maybe pick one up and try to smoke it, right? So then I'm like, well, what am I going to do with all these cigarette butts, these nasty cigarette butts, right? So I've been collecting them in a plastic bag I have stored outside in a spot. And there's a company that you might know called TerraCycle, and I will be sending them to them one day, and they will recycle the parts they can and compost the parts that can be composted. But boy, do I long for the day when there are no cigarette butts for me to pick up.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And I'm sure there's somebody in charge and working on trying to um, make compostable cigarettes, but I'm sure that's a bit of an engineering feat that's above me,
Yeah, I guess it's the filter is the hard part.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
it's probably easy. Yeah.
So, so my next kind of thought is that that was an experience for me that came from somebody just kind of gently asking, where does that go? What do you think your environmental impact on the planet looks like when you do something like that? That was kind of a gentle nudge that really pushed me towards, a little bit more of that environmental compliance and environmental mindset that we've talked about beforehand. What do you think is a because there's a balance, right? There's a balance between trying to be that environmentally conscious person and not the environmental preacher who's just a little bit crazy.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, that's very true. And I kind of alluded to this earlier, but you're just, getting in somebody's space, getting angry with them, trying to tell them what they're doing wrong. It's not going to work. Or if it does work, it's going to be temporary. You're going to win the battle but lose the war. So a part of that is, look, we need to give one another a break, especially now. There's a lot going on. But there are, again, something I talk about in the book, there's five different kinds of ways to manage conflict. And if you can kind of understand which way you normally operate under and then check yourself and see, well, how's that working out for you? Then you might be able to make some adjustments, and you're going to be able to manage yourself a little bit better. And then you can look toward, okay, now how, when I'm having a conversation, do I influence someone without coming off, kind of like a jerk?
Mm-hmm.
And those five ways of conflict management, they come from Thomas Kilmann, and they're like, you can avoid things, you can accommodate to others, but often at the expense of yourself. You can compromise, right, kind of in the middle there. You can compete or force. You can just want to win the conversation, or you can collaborate, and that's really the highest form of conflict management, because there is no conflict when you're collaborating. And all five of those, they're appropriate to use sometimes, but sometimes we have our go-to style and we maybe overuse it. For me, it was avoidance. If I couldn't collaborate, I avoided. I just didn't want to deal with the conflict, right? But
Mm-hmm.
there are some people who live in this place of, well, they always kind of want to win the conversation, right? Well, they're probably not going to get very far at convincing people to come over to their side of things, right? Um, and then there's a way that you can kind of improve your own, it's called conversational capacity, where you kind of go, okay, I'm going to put out there what I think. I'm then going to support it kind of with my data. Then, okay, I'm going to ask what people think of that, poke holes in it, play devil's advocate. And then past that, I'm going to say, okay, now what are others doing? What are other people thinking? Now you have a conversation, right? So first you regulate yourself, you manage yourself, and then you figure out a way to pull everybody into the conversation so that people feel heard. And when they feel heard, you at least have potential to influence them. You might still at the end of the day disagree, but at least you can remain friends or civil.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. That's because I think that relates a lot to how like municipalities typically try and educate about like water quality and stormwater and how people um, work. Because it's like, you know, if you're let's say that you haven't done enough to try and manage the city in terms of keeping stormwater clean and keeping it managed, but then you spend a ton of time trying to teach everybody about how much they're affecting stormwater. And yes, that's technically true, but how does that come across? How effective is that message going to be if you're, you know, if people interpret you coming from a hypocritical place, you know?
Yes, yes, definitely. And that's not to say that we all do have to be perfect, right? It's just to say that
Right.
um, you know, we should do what we can do, and then we should kind of give ourselves and everybody else a break because we're all trying, right? That's
Hmm.
kind of how I think of it.
Yeah, and that's a good point too. Is I heard a great quote in a recent meeting I was a part of, or maybe it was a webinar. I can't remember. Um, but they said that nobody considers themselves to be um, like a supporting character or supporting role. Everybody sees themselves as the main character in their personal story. And if you try to teach them about your narrative and about your book and make them feel like a side character in your novel, they're just not going to listen to you because no one wants to feel like a side character, you know?
Yeah, yeah. I've heard it said that the best conversationalist is someone who does the least talking, right? They just listen to what the other person is saying, and I know that's something I work on every day. I'll work on that my entire life, being a better listener, you know?
Hmm. Yeah. Well, so we're starting to get kind of close to our target time of about 30 minutes. I usually like to give our guests at this point in the podcast a chance to um, leave our listeners with a piece of imparting advice. Um, is there anything that, you know, if you could leave our listeners with one part of wisdom, if, you know, somebody only takes one piece from this entire conversation, what do you think that most valuable piece would be?
I would say get in touch with nature. Get in touch with the nature in your backyard, anywhere you find it, because when you see it, really see nature, you're gonna grow to love it. And when you want to love it, you're gonna want to protect it. And when you want to protect it, that means that you're going to be willing to take these small actions to incorporate new habits into your life. And suddenly you are living a sustainable life.
Wonderful. I love that. Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening to the Saving Stormwater podcast. If you aren't subscribed to our YouTube channel, we post our podcast videos there first. We also give tips to optimizing stormwater inspections, breakdowns of regional permits, and also a few exclusive episodes. I don't know, maybe this will be an exclusive. If you can't get enough stormwater information, make sure to check it out. All right, once again, thank you so much, Joyce, for joining us. I'd love to have you on again.
Thank you, Preston. It was my pleasure.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, everybody, and remember that we all live downstream.